Hi, everyone. I'm Kaylee Martin, and I'm a historian at the National World War II Museum.
And I'm Joshua Schick. I'm a curator at the National World War II Museum. And we're welcoming you to our PT 305 webinar sponsored by Valor Healthcare.
All right, now all aboard PT 305. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kaylee Martin, and this is Josh Schick, and we're crew members on PT 305 at the National World War II Museum. And Josh, what is a PT?
PT stands for patrol-torpedo. It's a boat that carries 4 large torpedoes, travels in the littoral zone, and is used to sink large enemy ships.
Well, that's really interesting. Let's go check it out.
Let's do it.
So Josh, what do you want to show me first?
We're going to check out the torpedo, the weapon that gives a PT its punch. This is a Mark 13 aerial torpedo, and it's on a roll-off rack. Aerial torpedoes are designed to be dropped by aircraft towards enemy ships, where they strike a ship underneath the water, dent the hull in, and cause it to fill with water and sink. That's why this is such a powerful weapon for such a little tiny boat.
So how did they drop it off of this boat then?
There's 2 things that have to happen. First, you have to start the torpedo, and you do that by pulling this tab here, and that gets the propellers spinning. Then you grab this lever here and you pull it. Once it gets pulled, these cables pop loose and it just rolls off the side of the boat and goes.
That's really cool. So how do you aim the torpedoes?
We're going to go to the bridge and find that out.
All right. So we're at the bridge of PT 305. Josh, what are all these things we see here?
This is how you drive the boat and aim the torpedoes. We've got the 2 most important things for actually driving the boat are the throttles and the wheel. The throttles allow you to go faster or slower, depending on how you manipulate them. And the wheel turns the rudder. So you turn the wheel, it turns the rudder and the water in the back of the boat, and that's how you turn the boat. Now, when we were talking about the torpedoes earlier, we said the torpedoes just fall off the side and go. Well, they go where the boat is pointing. So whatever you want to torpedo, you point the boat at it. Sometimes you need help doing that, and that's where this comes in.
What is that?
This is a Mark 31 torpedo director. This helps you lead your target so that you can fire the torpedo in front of something moving and it will intercept it. So using this, you aim the boat to aim the torpedoes.
Well, that seems pretty easy.
Now, none of this stuff works without a crew on board. And in addition to being up here on deck, they actually have to live on the boat, and that happens down below.
Well, let's go see where they live.
All right.
All right, everyone. Well, before we find out how sailors lived and worked on PT 305, let's learn a little bit more about what a PT boat is.
Well, a PT boat was really new to the U.S. Navy during World War II. Traditionally, the Navy built really big ships like aircraft carriers and battleships and destroyers, but they were looking for something a little bit different, something smaller that could go in shallow water and carry a torpedo, which has a really big punch to it. Now, what's different about PT boats is they're made out of wood and they're called a planing hull. Now, a big battleship moves through the water and pushes it out of the way. A planing hull is light enough that it actually just skips across the surface, kind of like a stone skipping across a pond. And that's how you get the speed of a PT boat.
Now, during World War II, the Navy had over 500 of these PT boats, and they were built mainly in 2 places in the United States. One was the Electric Boat Works, also known as ELCO, all the way up in Bayonne, New Jersey. And the other one was Higgins Industries, way down here in New Orleans. Now, you all may be familiar with Higgins Industries for the landing craft, but he also designed PT boats. PT 305 was built here by Higgins Industries in 1943. Now, as Josh said, an important aspect of the PTs was the fact that they were made of wood. Wood wasn't a strategic material. It wasn't used in airplanes or big ships. So there was a surplus to use, and that's how they were able to build so many. So Josh, why don't you show us a little bit about the construction of PT 305?
Brought you a little special piece here, and it is actually part of the deck of PT 305. Now, you think about a boat running through the water and everything, you got this nice big thick piece of wood, but what makes these boats very unique, look how skinny they are. there's only about an inch of wood between you and the water. But it's how these things are built that makes them so strong. It's made with 2 layers of planking. So this is the top planking that you will be walking on. But then if you look on the other side, there's different shaped planking, and it's running diagonally. That's the inside layer. Now, in order to make these really, really strong, you put 1 layer running one way, 1 layer running the other way, and then you rivet them together. Very similar to an aircraft. These little copper rivets run down. Now, there are 39,000 of these rivets holding together an entire PT boat, and it takes a lot of work to do all that. And the last little bit to make it lightweight is you want to stop the water. See, these boats got kind of some cracks in here and everything. Water could go through there. Well, it's important. Right here between the planks, they put a piece of fabric called canvas, and they dope it with this stuff called dolphinite. It's kind of like peanut butter, and you smear it in there, and it gets in all the cracks and makes that canvas waterproof. So that way you've got a really, really strong piece of hull that's really, really skinny.
Josh, that wood is very, very beautiful. Can you tell us what type of wood they used?
It's actually called mahogany. Now, it is a marine wood. It's used specially in boats and everything. And originally it came from the Philippines, which is where Higgins got it. Now, you won't see pretty shiny PT boats like this. Kaylee can tell us a little bit about the colors we see on the boat as well.
Yeah, so you can see behind us a boat is different shades of blue. And that was something that was done as a camouflage. Now, camouflage in a ship is to deceive. So you see the light blue and the dark blue, and that made it more difficult to tell which way the boat was going and how long it was. You'll see later on in the video some stripes on it, and that also helped deceive enemy as they were looking at it. So they were actually very colorful boats and not all gray.
So we've kind of learned a little bit about what a PT boat is. I think we should check out segment 2 and see what it's like to live on one.
When we were at the bridge, Josh mentioned that it took a crew to man PT 305. And now we're down here in the crew's quarters, and we're going to tell you a little bit about this crew. So Josh, how many crew were on PT 305?
Yeah, 14 guys had to fit on this boat. In this compartment, 8.
8. As I say, it looks a little small for 14 guys.
It's a little small for 8 too.
So they lived on board, and I see over here it looks like a kitchen.
Yes.
You want to tell us about that?
On a ship, a kitchen is called a galley. And this is usually a sailor's favorite thing other than his rack. So he can sleep and he can come here and he can eat and he can get his coffee. Now, PT boats are very small. They're not like big, gigantic ships. They have to have a really tiny kitchen that can only go for a few days. So they have a refrigerator to keep their food cold. Our guys put a toaster in, and they've got these 2 little hot plates. One of the other things that happens when boats move a lot, and sometimes when the cook is down here cooking, he has to keep all of his pots sitting still. So he can take this handy pot holder here, and he can keep this pot from moving while the ship's rolling around. Now, they're not always in the galley. Whenever they're up on top, the cook doesn't always stand here. He has a battle station too, and our cook on PT 305 actually manned the forward gun. So after they eat, they're going to go into the rest of the crew's quarters. And I think Kaylee knows a lot about the rest of the crew's quarters.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time working in here and making this look really cool. And you can see they had a lot of stuff. So they lived on board. So everything a sailor had, he had to hide in all these little nooks and crannies. So this is a bunk, and it belonged to one guy, and that was his. It's where he slept. He had all of his clothes and books and shoes and things stored there, and he had some space down here. And now this just looks like a couch. It looks comfortable, but every night 4 guys would have to make these up and sleep in them. These were their bunks. They didn't get a nice one all to themselves, but when you're living so close, everybody had to get along and make do. So you see where they sleep, and Josh told you about where they made their food, but Josh, where would they eat? I don't really see a table here.
Well, they pull out their handy table here.
Oh, wow.
Flip it up, grab your meal, sit down, and get ready to go on patrol.
Okay, so after they eat, if they're not going on patrol and they're ready to go to bed, they have to brush their teeth, wash their hands. Could they do that here?
Yeah, they go to the head.
The what?
The head.
What's the head?
It's maybe for bathroom.
Bathroom? We definitely need to check that out.
Let's see it.
All right.
Welcome to the ship's head. This is the smallest compartment on PT 305. It's got a nice little sink here for washing your hands and brushing your teeth. Got your towels hanging in here. And underneath me is the head, which is Navy for toilet. Operates by taking this little handle here, pumping it, and that brings in seawater from the ocean, and it uses it to flush the toilet, so you don't have to deal with it. Now, what else you will notice in this tiny, tiny room is that there's no shower. There's no shower or bathtub on a PT boat. You don't get to do any of that on board. If you do want to take a bath, you either have to go to a base or you jump into the ocean and use special saltwater soap. So if you'll excuse me. Well, we've looked a little bit in the cruise quarters and we're already actually getting some really great questions. So Kaylee, what did they eat on a PT boat?
Well, so there's kind of two different ways they would eat on a PT boat. So on a day-to-day basis, they would actually be stationed at a base facility. And that base facility would provide them with hot meals, chicken, meatloaf, the standard kind of things that people ate. Now, when they went out on patrols, which is when they went out to go into the action, there would be a little bit less that they could eat then. So our ship's cook, who is actually a baker, would make sandwiches, small things like that that they could eat underway. Now, we do know our baker, and his name was Ben Bronder. He was a really good cook. He even learned how to fry donuts on that little hot plate that they had. And the guys loved his donuts. He would bake bread because as a baker, he learned all the specialties. So our guys really loved their cook. They ate really well. So after you eat a donut, brushing your teeth is very, very important. And we just got a question about that. Did you have to bring your own toothbrush and soap? You're a sailor and you're in the Navy, so the Navy gives you everything you need. So the Navy would issue them their toothbrush or their soap or their special saltwater soap. Yeah, but they could also go and buy something if they had something they really liked. And they would use the exchanges and they could purchase things, but the Navy provided them with everything they needed. Now we have another question. Why does a torpedo sink the ship? So how a torpedo works is it's got an explosive warhead in it, and then it has its own motor. It's almost like a boat in and of itself. It just travels underneath the water. Now, if you think about it, this little thin hull of a ship is holding all the water back. Well, when the torpedo explodes, it breaks that and it starts to let the water into the ship. Then the ship becomes too heavy and it goes down. Now, in some of the video too, you'll see some other weapons. It wasn't just torpedoes. A PT boat is completely full of machine guns and cannons. It has a lot on it. And those were used primarily for defense in case the PT boat was attacked. Speed was the most important thing to these boats. If they got attacked by a bigger ship, they would just leave as quickly as possible. And now someone asked, how did they live like that for a lot of days in the cruise quarters? It's a really small space, and it is a really small space. Part of it was they had to learn to get along. And so that was really important that they came together as a team, but also living at the base facilities, they would have showers, they could go off the boat for a time, and then occasionally they would get what's called liberty, and they could go into town and have dinner. So they weren't confined to the boat. It's not like a battleship where you go aboard and you're out for months and months and months. They had a little bit more freedom in harbor to leave the boat, go to the next boat and talk to their buddies. So that helped give them a little more space. Also during the day, they were busy. They would go out at night, they would have to come back, they would have to clean, they had to do their laundry, clean the boat, clean the weapons. So they stayed very busy and didn't have to stay confined down there. So being a sailor is pretty important, kind of tough sounding job, Kaylee. How do you end up on a PT boat as a sailor? Well, PT sailors were in really dangerous positions. So it was a volunteer force. Since it was very dangerous, the Navy didn't force men into it, just like on submarines. So as a sailor came into the Navy, he would go to boot camp first. And then after boot camp, if he scored well, he could go to a specialist school. He might learn to be a baker or a torpedo man or work on machine guns or work on engines. After that school, if he worked really hard and did really well, he could volunteer for PT service. Then they would go to PT boat school in Melville, Rhode Island. And there they learned everything there was to know about PT boats. How to run the boats, how to fix the boats, how to clean the boats. And after that school, they would get assigned to a PT boat and become a PT sailor. Now, we had a question earlier about how many people could you fit on board. PT boat is crewed.
PT 305 specifically, by about 14 guys. Now, there's different types of people on board too. There's called officers and sailors. Officers are kind of like teachers in your classroom. They're in charge. And then all the sailors work underneath them. So we had 14. 2 of them were officers, and the rest 12 were the crew members on the boat. And like Kaylee said, working together as a team is very important for these guys because they're living in a very tiny thing. Imagine if you took your classroom everywhere you went. You had to sleep in it, you had to work in it, you had to live in it. Everyone had to be in this very small space. And so it was very important for them to know each other's jobs and for them to get along in what they were doing. And that instilled a certain level of pride.
Yeah, and we have a question here about, did they have a doctor on board? What if they got sick? Now, the PT boats operated in something that was called a squadron, and that was 12 boats together that supported one another. And aside from the sailors on the boats, there were sailors in the squadron who were support personnel. And that's where you had your doctors and a pharmacist mate, which is a medical enlisted man in the Navy. So they had this whole support force behind them of messmen and typists. I mean, this whole system to make everything work, and officers who were in charge of that. So anything they needed, they had within the squadron to take care of. And in that squadron, like Josh said, they built a lot of pride, and they were really proud of being PT boat sailors. So we're going to go to the document camera and show you a PT boater's uniform. So you'll see this is a pretty standard PT boat or Navy uniform. I'm sure you've seen it before in pictures, and they've got the stripes, and he's got here, this is his rating patch. And then above that, this is the special part of this uniform. That is a PT boat patch. That meant that he was a qualified PT sailor, and only qualified PT sailors got to sew this patch on their uniform. This gave everyone the chance to know this is a PT sailor, and they took immense pride in that. Now, another thing that they would have, and we have here, is a very small little pin. Now, this one's actually been fashioned to be worn as a bracelet, but they would wear this pin on the uniform right here, and it's a PT boat, and it would indicate that they were a PT sailor. And sailors could buy extra ones of these to turn into bracelets that maybe they'd send home to their moms or their sisters or their sweethearts, because they were so proud of the special force that they were in.
All right, well, now that we've learned kind of what sailors are, how they got into the Navy, let's learn a little bit more in this next segment about how PT 305 operates. Welcome to the engine room of PT 305. The 305 is powered by 3 Packard Marine engines. They're rated at 1,500 horsepower each. They're really, really strong engines. Each engine is attached to a long shaft with a propeller down in the water, and it spins that propeller, and that's what pushes the boat. They're very, very powerful, and they can get this boat going almost 45 miles per hour, or 41 knots, which is Navy speak for speed. Now, the sailor that stands here is called a motor machinist mate, or a motor mac. He's in charge of running these engines. Now, he has a very important job. He has to put the engines in forward so they can go forward, or reverse so they can go backwards. And he does that by pushing on these levers right here. That engine's now in forward. He's got to do it on all 3 engines in sequence as the captain needs them. And that's how the 305 moves. When the motor mac goes to start the engine, he doesn't just stick a key in it like your car. He has to use this control panel and these fuel pipes down here. He selects which engine gets gasoline, then he looks at all of his pressures and his gauges and his oil, and then he reaches right here and he can turn each engine on with these buttons. Now, after the engine started and it's time for him to shift it, he has to know what the captain of the boat wants. And that's done by these arrows here. So all these arrows have moved into a head. So now the motor mac knows that they want the engines going forward. So he's going to grab his lever and push it in forward.
While the motor mac's busy in the engine room underway, I'm down here in the chart house where we navigate and tell the captain where to steer the boat. This is our chart table, and you can see we've got a map on it and some of these instruments that we use to plot our course. Now we're trying to find our patrol zone, and that's where we spend time looking for enemy forces. But once we get there, the most important piece of equipment is this box right here. This is our radar box. Now a radar just works by sending out a signal, and on this little screen will pop up a dot if there's a ship at sea. Now when we find one, that means it's an enemy, and then we can move in for an attack. So we'll have to plot our course so that we can come in and hit them with one of our torpedoes. Josh, earlier you mentioned the littoral zone. What is that?
The littoral zone is where PT boats fought their little bit of the naval war. And we're here in the chart house to explain what that is. So imagine if you're standing on the beach. And if you look out and you can see ships within a mile or two of the coast, maybe still big enough for you to see people on them, that's the littoral zone. They're not out in the deep, deep water. They're actually running along the beach here, along the coast, and they're hunting for enemy ships that are sailing along there.
And where was PT-305 doing that?
PT-305 was fighting in the Mediterranean, actually off of the coast of a little island called Corsica. And they would leave Corsica and they would go over to Italy. And they would cruise up and down the beaches off of Italy looking for ships.
And what were these ships holding that they wanted to sink?
These were German supply ships. So they had all the beans and the bullets and the boots and the trucks that the German army was using in Italy. And so we were going to get those ships and we were going to sink them before the German army could get them.
And that helped keep them from having supplies to fight the war, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a very important job. Underway, the deck of a PT boat is a very noisy place. So there's very few ways you can actually communicate with the other sailors. The first way is by just hand signals, waving. The second way is to go up and shout to them, even though you really can't hear them. And the third way is called a sound-powered telephone. Now these are very similar to the tin can, cup, and a string, except it's the Navy version. So it takes the sound of your voice, impacting a diaphragm in here, and it changes it into an electrical signal so the person with the other set can hear your voice. So we're going to use this to communicate with our starboard turret.
Bow gun to starboard turret, do you copy? Starboard turret to bow gunners, I read you. All guns manned and ready. Commence patrol. Wind them up.
All right, Kaylee, now we know what a PT boat is and how it works. Let's go for a ride.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're getting a lot of really awesome questions from you guys, so keep it coming. And we're going to take a few of those. Josh, somebody has asked, on a PT boat, what would be the main battle stations? And can you give us a quick explanation of what a battle station is?
Yeah, a battle station is where you need to be when the boat is going to go fight someone. So, you know, in the movie, when you see them call battle stations, everyone's running around trying to scramble to their spots. It's how you determine how many people you need on a boat. So a PT boat needs 14 people at their battle stations to fight. And those are mostly guns. There's a 40 millimeter gun on the stern. There's a 20 millimeter gun in the middle of the boat. There's another 20 millimeter up front. There are two 50 caliber gun tubs. You can kind of see them right here and right there. There needs to be a motor mech, an engine guy down in the engine room. There has to be a radio man where Kaylee was in the chart house, sitting there manning the radio. Then there needs to be the two officers, the captain and the executive officer, sitting up there, driving the boat and making the decisions. So it's very important, and they all have to fill into those spots.
And now someone asked about laundry, because I mentioned they had to do their own laundry and take care of all of their own things. So they had a few ways they could do laundry. Now there would be laundry facilities at the base, and sometimes maybe they might even pay for those things. Now, sometimes they also did something kind of risky. They would take their laundry, put it in a bag, tie it up, and throw it overboard while the boat was underway and let it tumble around in the salt water. Now, we know one of PT-305 sailors did that, and you know what happened? He lost all his clothes. So it wasn't a very smart thing to do. Their other option would be to take a bucket of water and just do it on board and lay it out and hang it out to dry.
Now, there was a great question of if you're doing your laundry, you need to take your bath, how does soap work? So saltwater soap is different from the soap in your bathroom. The soap in your bathroom is kind of based on a fat, and when you use soap, you get all the bubbles. You know, it lathers up, especially nowadays. You got to wash your hands, and you get it all on there, and it lathers up. Well, salt water, the salt in the water kind of stops those bubbles from being formed. So you have to have a different type of soap that uses a different chemical that will actually be broken down by salt water so you can get some good scrubbing. Now that works, you know, for washing your hair and also your clothes.
Yeah. So as you saw in that last bit, those sound-powered headsets, those were really, really cool. And that was one way that they could communicate on PT boats. But when they're underway, those don't work talking to another ship. So there were several ways that PT boats could talk to other ships. Radios were the obvious choice, but what if your radio went out? Or what if someone couldn't get you on the radio? Well, one of the things they would use are called signal flags. And you might have seen these hanging up on the boat. Now, signal flags are a system of communications where each letter of the alphabet has its own flag. This one right here is a P. And PT 305 would fly the P to indicate that it was a PT boat. And then, so they knew which PT boat it was, she flew these pennants you may have noticed. And you can look for them again when we go out on the boat later. So this is a 3. And they would hang up 3. We've got our 0. And I bet you all can guess what we've got coming next. Our 5. And this allowed any other boats far away to instantly recognize that this is PT 305. Now these signal flags, and then the numbers are called pennants, these can be used to send messages. Each flag has its own meaning if it's used by itself, or they can be put up together in a certain order to tell people things like, danger, stay away, I'm broken down, I need help. And it's a very old means of communication that no matter what language you speak, what country you're from, you understand the meaning of these flags. So it's a really important way for them to communicate. Now you also saw a flag that's probably more familiar to you, and Josh is going to show you those on the document cam.
All right, I have something special for you. This is the U.S. flag. In Navy terms, it's called an ensign. Now the ensign flies from the highest point in a PT boat. Now what's special about this one, this isn't one from World War II. This is actually one we had specially made for the PT boat by someone named Sue Schick. Now Miss Schick made us a proper 48-star flag. Now during World War II, we did not have 50 states. Alaska and Hawaii were still just territories. And so that's the biggest difference you'll see. There's always 13 stripes, but you'll only see 48 stars right here. Now you'll also look at this flag and see that it's maybe a little bit messed up on this side. And that is something that sailors would really take pride in. A good flag that was nice and beaten up, because this shows that they were out there. They were out running in the water and doing their things. And this is what the wind does to it. Now there are rules with flags, just like flags flying from your house. The Navy says that there can only be 6 inches of good flag before it has to be replaced. So we can still do a little bit more wear, and we can have a really cool, salty looking flag before we have to get a new one. But these are very important. Every single time the PT boat starts to move and goes out on patrol, they immediately raise this flag. Now there's another flag I want you to look for on the videos, and it is called a commissioning pennant. These are very special for Navy ships because they represent when the ship officially enters U.S. Navy service. They have 7 stars on them and a red over white stripe with something called a swallowtail. Now these are always flying from a ship that's in commission. From the very first day that they arrive from the factory and the Navy crew steps on board and they say, this is an official U.S. Navy ship. For PT 305, the flag went up on December 8, 1943. Now I brought the reproduction ones that we were flying from the boat. And you can see that this one is nice and worn out because we've got some good times and some high winds cruising around on our PT boat. So these are really special, neat things. And I think I want to look at just a few questions in case someone has them, and is why is the flag ripped? That's all the wind whipping around and watching it hit. So when you see our video, always look up at the top of the boat. You'll see these flags zipping around up there.
All right, well, we're getting ready to go out for our big ride on PT-305. But before we do, we want to tell you really quickly about a restoration. You may have heard us use this word before. Restoration is the process of bringing something back to like new condition to fix it up. By the time the work on PT-305 was started, she was 70 years old. To get it back to that beautiful condition you see it today, it took the hard work of a really wonderful volunteer restoration crew. These dedicated men and women worked for 10 years to make the boat look and operate the way you see it today, even doing things like making us these special flags that we've shown you. All right, so Josh, we've learned a lot about PTs today. I think it's time to go and take that ride.
Sounds good.
She's the only actual PT boat that is fully restored, 100% operational, and a combat veteran of World War II.
I'm here with Bob Wade, PT-305's captain. Bob, what's it like to captain a PT boat?
Well, it's the most awesome thing in the world, actually. It's very exciting, it's very fun, the boat's very fast, and you just imagine what it would have been like during the war operating these and having a large crew and being fired upon at night.
And at nighttime, right?
And at night, so very, very exciting.
PT-305 is a restored World War II vessel, right? She is an actual boat from World War II.
Yes, she is, and she saw action in the Mediterranean during World War II. She sank a total of 3 vessels, and she served gallantly with her crew during World War II.
So Bob, we mentioned PT-305 being on patrol, and she patrolled the Mediterranean, fighting against German forces and battling German shipping. But why does she have swastikas on the bow there?
Well, PT-305 at this point during the war sank 2 German flak lighters. So German boats would have had the swastika on them, and that was a record and a bit of pride for the boat to show those on their boat.
And we were going pretty fast out there today. How fast can PT-305 go?
Well, PT-305 can actually do 41 knots.
That's very fast. And it looked like you were working pretty hard out there working the wheel. What's that like to man that wheel? It seems very physical.
Well, the wheel turns very easily when we're going slow. So when we're backing up or coming into the dock, there's a lot of revolutions. So it's approximately 16 revolutions from one side all the way to the other. So that's quite a bit. And then when you're underway doing any kind of speed, it's very hard to turn. So it's a good workout.
So Bob, how did you become a captain on PT-305?
Well, it was a lot of work. I had to have so much sea time, so I was in the Navy, so I was able to use part of that as my sea time. And then I was the XO of this vessel for over 3 years, so that counted as my sea time as well. Plus I had some experience in between the Navy and now, which gave me sea time. Then I took a class and I had to take a test, and it's a U.S. Coast Guard test, and luckily I passed the first time. I got my captain's license last year, and so it's been wonderful ever since.
And she is here today as kind of a living memory of the men that served aboard her, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly what she's all about. This is about these men, these sailors that fought bravely, and this is a memorial to them and to Andrew Higgins, who built this boat. This is why we did this to bring this back to life.
And that's right, as Bob said, with Andrew Higgins, she was built here in New Orleans. So PT-305 being back in New Orleans, she's come back home.
That's exactly right, and that's one of the greatest aspects of this boat.
Kaylee, now that we've combed our hair from our exciting PT boat ride, I think we should think about what we've learned today. We've seen how a PT boat operates, what a ship's head is, how the motor Mac runs the engines, and how the captain really operates his boat, fighting against Axis forces in the Mediterranean.
That's right, Josh. And as we wrap up today, we're standing here on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, where during the war, Higgins Industry tested not only their famous landing craft, but PT-305 as well.
So thank you all for joining us, and definitely come back and see us.
Bye. That was a lot of fun. And you guys have been asking such great questions today. We're going to finish out with some excellent questions from our viewers. So
Especially Miss Loretta's class.
you guys are really asking great questions. So Ryan wants to know, how long would they be on the boat for? So there's a couple of different answers to that. Each sailor would generally be assigned to a PT boat for about 1 year. And then at that time, he'd be sent back to the United States. He would go back to Melville for some refresher training and be sent to another boat, possibly in another part of the world. Now, as far as how long they would be on the boat, during the day, I mean, they would be on and off doing the work. They would be on the boat overnight for patrols, but each sailor was assigned to a boat for about a year.
I've got a question, kind of two electronics related question. Is there electrical power on a PT boat? And is there an underwater camera to see submarines? One of those is a definite yes. One of them is, I bet they wish they had it. They did have electricity on the PT boats. They had lights, just like your house. The stove and everything was powered by electricity and all that. It's just boats are very complicated because the boat's engines have to be running in order for them to have electricity. So when the boat is sitting back at base, they would sometimes have to plug the electricity in from the shore with a big extension cord, or they would have to run their own generators. But they had all the comforts except air conditioning. No air conditioning on a PT boat. It could get pretty hot or pretty cold in there. Now, a camera to see submarines, that would be really cool, but they didn't have those in World War II. The way they found submarines in World War II was with something called sonar. It would send sound waves out into the water, and they would bump into a boat and they would bounce back. And that's how they would be able to tell if there was something there. Unfortunately, a PT boat was just too small to have that on there. And so PT boats could not find submarines with any sort of technology. They had to look for them.
All right, so one of the questions we were asked is, how many jobs were on a PT boat? So that's a great question, and that plays a lot into who our sailors were. So you had a torpedoman's mate, and his responsibility was for the maintenance of the torpedo, but also firing the torpedoes. You would have either a ship's cook or a baker, and they would feed the crew. You would have what's called a gunner's mate, and he would be responsible for maintaining all the guns on the ship. You would have a radioman and a radarman, and they would work their equipment, and you would have motor machinist mates who would take care of the engines. Now, you hear me saying all of these, torpedoman's mate, these things, that's called a rate. And in the Navy, you have a rate, and that tells you what your job is. And your rating is how far you've moved along. So if you hear a torpedoman's mate first class, that's his level of where he is in their hierarchy. So you had 2 officers, and they were, like Josh said, the ones in charge. But there were several jobs, and that could kind of shift. They didn't always have a pharmacist mate on board, but one might join them for a patrol just in case anything happened. So there were a variety of jobs, but everybody had to know everyone else's job in case somebody got injured. Then somebody could step up and take over their job, or our torpedoman's mate. He might be on a machine gun when they go out. It just depended on what they needed.
Someone asked how far a PT boat could go out. I guess we need to tell you how big they are too. PT boat is a little bit bigger than a big yellow school bus. It's about 78 feet long. They're 20 feet wide, and they can go pretty far. They carry a lot of gas. Your normal car carries around 20, 25 gallons of gasoline. PT boat has 3,000 gallons on it.
That's a lot of gas.
It's a lot of gas. And they can go almost 500 miles. Now that depends. If they're going really, really fast, they're going to burn a lot of gas. If they go not so fast, kind of more of a slow pace, they can go a lot farther.
And somebody asked, what if they are out to sea and a storm blows up? So one of the things that PT boats had to be very careful about was the weather, because they're very, very dangerous in rough water. So they had to pay attention every morning to what the weather was like. And if the weather got really bad, if they could turn back and get back to their base first, they would have to do that. Otherwise, they would get tossed around in the water. Now, what's important to note here, though, is PTs didn't cross the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean on their own. They're much too small for that. It would be too dangerous. So to get them to the Mediterranean or to the Pacific, they would be loaded on much larger ships. They could safely take them across.
So we have a great question about how do you know if it's an enemy ship? Identifying friend from foe is something very important, especially in wartime. And one of the big things you would do during the daylight hours is you would look at the flag flying from that ship. That's why flying the US ensign or flag is so important. PT boats were completely different. PT boats operated only at nighttime. So they had to go out when the sun was setting, and they would go to their patrol zone. Well, you can't really see other ships at nighttime with any sort of accuracy. And that's why Kaylee was talking earlier about radar. Radar is how they find those ships. Now, the agreement with all the other friendly ships was that if PT boats were going to a certain area, none of the friendly ships would go to that area. So those PT boats would know that any ship they found was an enemy ship, and they could immediately move in for a torpedo attack.
Now, someone asked, what happens if an engine blows up? How do they get out? And that does sound really scary, because Josh said they have all that gas and the big engines. Thankfully, these engines were very safe, and none of our guys ever got hurt like that. Now, if something happened, they have one little ladder that's their escape route right up onto the deck, and so they'd have to be very fast. But thankfully, there were a lot of systems in place to make these engines very safe, and that never happened.
Now, war is pretty dangerous, obviously, and we've had a number of questions if anyone was hurt on the boat or anything like that. We only had one man on our boat who was actually injured by a exploding bomb, actually. And so he's the only one on our crew. Our crew was very lucky for all the action that they saw. They only had one man injured, and he was actually in the engine room at the time. And he climbed out of the hatch to look to see what was going on, because he heard noise, and there was an explosion off in the water, and a piece of shrapnel hit him in the face.
Now, Scarlett's asked, since we're talking about the engine room, what kind of fuel does it use? Josh, you want to explain to them what kind of fuel a PT boat uses? It's a little different.
Yeah, it's different than your car. It's called avgas, or aviation gasoline. Now, that's different than jet fuel. If you go to the airport and get in a plane, they fly big jet fuel, which is a little bit different. We have basically very special gas for cars. It's called high octane gas. It runs at 100%, 100 octane in the fuel, and you have to get it for special reasons. Now, during World War II, it was important that these boats had a very special supply of this gas, because they were the only boats in the area that would actually use it. So they were very unique in that respect.
And Miss Loretta is asking what ranks would be on the boat. So when I was mentioning before about rates, that's for your enlisted guys. That's the non-commissioned guys that are in the Navy. Ranks are for the officers. Now, PT boats usually had what we call junior officers, and they would be officers right out of officer candidate school. So they would be an ensign, which is the lowest ranking in the Navy, or a second lieutenant or first lieutenant. Oh, I'm sorry, lieutenant junior grade is what they call in the Navy. A first lieutenant is in the Army. See, there's different rates and ranks depending on which branch you're in. So you would have a lieutenant junior grade or a lieutenant, and they would be in charge of the boat.
So Kaylee and I are throwing a bunch of different words around and everything. And one of the words someone asked about, Miss Loretta's class, again, is what is a vessel? So we keep saying boat and ship and vessel. It's essentially the same thing. Now, a boat and a ship are two completely different things. And the best way to remember it is a boat can fit on a ship. Boats are usually very small. Now, vessel works in place of ship as well. The words mean the same thing. So wanted to clear that one up for you.
So to combine some of the questions we're getting, people want to know how durable were these boats and what if your boat was sinking? Now you saw when Josh showed this piece, it's not a very big boat, but it is very strong. And one of the benefits of them being made of wood was that they could plug holes easily. So something that's important that sailors learn is called damage control. So if an enemy bullet goes and makes a hole in your boat, you learn to drive a wedge in there and plug that hole. PT boats were fairly durable. They could take a lot of punishment, but they might get a little beat up. So they actually lasted. I mean, PT 305 was on the water at 70 years old. So they're very durable. They can last a very long time, but they have to be well taken care of. So the sailors were constantly painting and patching and repairing their boat because it's what kept them safe when they went out.
Safety is important for the sailors on board too. They all wore helmets to protect them from fire. They wore big life vests called kapok because they are stuffed with this material called kapok, and it was what would allow them to float if they had to jump off the boat. In addition, like Kaylee was saying, the boat has stuff to keep it safe too. There's called a fire suppression system, which is basically a bunch of big fire extinguishers that if you pull the handle, they can extinguish a fire in the engine room. So the Navy thought about a lot of these things before they just set the guys out on the boat and said, go drive around.
Yeah. So if something happened and the boat was sinking, they would first try to repair the holes and patch the ship up and keep it going. And because you want to save your ship, but if there was no way to save it, they actually had life rafts, and there was one on the front and one in the back, and they would have their life jackets on, and they would be told to go abandon ship, and they would get in the lifeboats, and they could set off a flare so people would know where they were. But thankfully, that happened very infrequently.
Getting a couple questions about torpedoes and swastikas, which those are called kill plaques. Now, I can answer the torpedo one. I was standing next to one earlier. We have 4 on board. Now, torpedoes are really heavy. They weigh 2,000 pounds, almost about as big as a fully grown walrus. And you cannot replace them after you fire them. You have to go all the way back to base, and you got to get a crane, and you have to put a new one on there. Now, Kaylee, I think, knows a lot about the kill plaques that are on our boat.
So that was something that was common in the Navy and in the Air Force. When you hit an enemy ship or aircraft or something, you would actually get what Josh said was called a kill plaque. It would indicate that you sank an enemy ship or you downed an enemy aircraft. So PT 305, as you heard Captain Bob say, at the time of the war that we show her, had sunk 2 enemy ships, big F-lighters carrying a lot of supplies. So she put those up there with pride to show that she had sunk 2 enemy vessels. Now, the third one she sank was in late April of 1945, so it was much too late in the war for her to have a chance to put that one on there. Otherwise, she would have had 3.
Getting a couple questions about bullets and torpedoes, and someone asked, what if one of the guns breaks? It's a really good point to ask that question because sailors had to be very meticulous with their job. They had to take care of their guns so that they wouldn't break whenever they were out on patrol. That's why they spent a lot of time during the day cleaning them and fixing them and repairing them. And because PT 305 is such a small boat, if you ran out of bullets, you were out of bullets. You had to go home and go get more. So they had to be careful about what they fired at. and they had to be very deliberate in their actions.
And Kendra asked, what kind of qualifications or tests would you need to pass in order to become a PT sailor despite it being a volunteer position? That's a really great question. So the Navy had, like I said, special training schools, and you would have to pass these training schools and become in the top of your class and really, really knowledgeable about something in order to go to PT school. Now, when you got to PT school, you also had to perform really well. If you weren't doing so good, they may say, you know what, maybe PT service isn't for you, because in a small group, everybody had to be very good at their job in order to keep each other safe. So it depended on what rate a sailor was pursuing. If he wanted to become a torpedoman, he would have to pass the torpedo school test and learn all about the torpedo, how to disassemble it, how to put it together, how to fix it, how to fire it, all those little details. If he were a baker, he had to learn all sorts of ways to cook and different equipment and different recipes. And it's different to make bread for 6 guys or 10 guys than it is for 600 on a battleship. So it really depended on what they were pursuing with what tests they would have to pass, but they had to work really hard and study really hard to become PT sailors.
So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. We've been getting a lot of really great ones. So the next one I want to talk about is radios. Did the ships have radios? Yes, they did. They could communicate with other ships, something that's called TBS, talk between ships. It's really short range, kind of like handheld walkie-talkies. And then they had larger radios that could transmit longer distances back to their base. But radio signals can be intercepted. Other people can hear radio signals, and they can even figure out where they're coming from. So they didn't tend to use the long all the way back to base ones. They would only talk between their ships from really close range while on patrol. Communication is very important for PT boats because they go out in small groups, usually groups of 3. And so the 3 boats working in the total darkness of nighttime need to be able to talk to each other to say, hey, we're going to take a left turn up here. So everyone is on the same page.
So let's see, we've got a question. How many PT boats served in the European theater and how many in the Pacific? It's kind of difficult to give exact numbers. There were so many, but in the European theater, there were 3 squadrons in the Mediterranean. Now, those were 2 squadrons of 12 and 1 super big squadron that had 18. And then there was 1 squadron in the English Channel. So there were very few in the Pacific, in the Mediterranean, and the European theater. There were many more in the Pacific, but they also had a squadron in Alaska. Can you imagine being on a PT boat covered in ice? Ooh.
Cold, very cold. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. It's been really exciting to share PT 305 with you, and thank you so much for your questions. So until next time, thank you very much.
And we want to thank our sponsors again.